Elden Ring won Game of the Year for 2022 and has gotten over 331 awards, which even surpasses The Last of Us 2. When Elden Ring first came out, it dominated online gaming discourse for months. Over 20 million units have been sold, making it the fastest-selling title from Software and Bandai Namco. Elden Ring by itself has the potential to even outsell the entire Dark Souls series with over 33.4 million copies sold. However, not everyone enjoys the Elden Ring experience. Compared to the other Souls games, Elden Ring is the most accessible in terms of difficulty and online play, but those changes don't matter for some gamers. Before I talk about why that is, let's talk about why a large number of people do enjoy Elden Ring. Game designer and educator Marc Leblanc created 8 kinds of fun, which helps game designers be more specific when discussing game design. Elden Ring hosts all 8 types of fun within its game design. All 8. Number 1 is sensation. Seeing something or seeing someone beautiful, eating something delicious, all these things give us pleasure. It is primarily the aesthetics of your game that will deliver these pleasures. And man, Elden Ring isn't the most graphically impressive game in terms of technology or realism, but does that really matter when it looks like this? The god rays, the mix of warm and cold colors. The atmosphere it brings to the table is phenomenal. The earlier Souls titles were more macabre and monochromatic in terms of lighting and color, but Elden Ring uses foliage and nature to make things a lot easier on the eyes. Sound design and haptic feedback collide to make the world and its inhabitants weighty and grounded. When the player unleashes a heavy attack and staggers them after a counter, oh, that feels good. Number 2 is fantasy. This is the pleasure of the imaginary world and the pleasure of imagining yourself as something you are not. Number 3 is narrative. By the pleasure of narrative, Leblanc does not necessarily mean the telling of a prescribed linear story. He means instead a dramatic unfolding of a sequence of events, however it happens. Of course, linear storytelling like the latest Naughty Dog games provide an engaging cinematic experience. Elden Ring, however, hosts pieces of interesting events that the player can enjoy on their leisure. Of course, fighting a major boss is a drama within itself. Elden Ring isn't devoid of a main story though. It just unravels more like a Russian play, where things get crazy between key characters at the end. Number 4 is challenge. The Souls games are known for their difficulty. However, Elden Ring makes the adventure a little more survivable with the help of summons and having OP companions join your world. Number 5, fellowship. Yeah, there are a lot of nasty things that don't want you alive in the lands between, but that makes the friends you meet along the way even more special. Also, like the rest of the Souls games, players can join their friends to help them or receive help from them. In the previous games, level caps were set, so if a friend was a higher level than you, they wouldn't be able to join, or their level would lower and certain weapons or skills couldn't be used. Elden Ring got rid of all that and made the process fairly simple. Number 6, discovery. The pleasure of discovery is a broad one. Anytime you seek and find something new, that is a discovery. Finding everything in the lands between is a big task and a reward within itself. When the player starts without much, they can only gain, and their main avenue to do that is exploration. You might find things that directly help you, or things that do the opposite, but they both can be an exciting aspect of discovery. Number 7, expression. The writing is on the wall and on your character. Also, the game gives you ideas on how to make a build in the beginning, but you can really build your character in whichever way you like, for better or for worse. Number 8, submission. This is a big one because technically all games include this entering of the magic circle, of leaving the real world behind and entering into a new, more enjoyable set of rules and meaning. Elden Ring's characters really put the world in perspective as this desolate wasteland, but one where you supposedly have agency in. There are other characters that are like you, but their mental states have been driven down into a depression they can't escape. They can't see the light of grace anymore, but you can, and you don't want to be pushed down as well, so you keep on looking for the light. The world's gameplay elements intertwine in theme with the story, and that always provides a better, more meaningful experience that allows us to suspend our disbelief. So that's all 8, but there are more. Schell, another game designer and educator, provides more examples in his textbook, The Art of Game Design. There's anticipation, Seeing the light at the end of a tunnel, finally opening that door that was unlocked. What kind of boss lies behind these walls? Is this a foe or a friend? And if it's a friend, will it later betray me? Can I make that jump? Can I run through this booby-trapped hallway? Delight in another's misfortune. I like this one. In Elden Ring, you can invade another player's world and mess that player up. Just ruin their day. Take their experience points and run. Griefing is a feature, not a defect, you Minecraft snobs. Gift giving. You can't give every fabulous item you find along the way, but most things are able to be dropped and given to others. So you can be a good guy in Elden Ring too. Humor. Two unconnected things are suddenly united by a paradigm shift. Possibility. This kind of goes with number 7. Expression. But yeah, Elden Ring gives a lot of choices for the player to make. Surprise. Thrill.
What a thrill, with darkness and silence through the night.
Triumph over adversity. Pride in an accomplishment. Oh, since I killed the dragon, I get to use some of its moves. Oh. Anyway, Elden Ring seems to include a bit of every pleasure, and that could help explain why it's such a well-received game. But that doesn't answer why one wouldn't enjoy the game. You see, these pleasures, or fun factors that I just described, aren't hard rules on creating a game. It's the combination of these factors and the combination of what each individual player enjoys that is more determining of whether one would like or dislike a game. For example, some of y'all don't like surprises in an action RPG, but you would like them in something like Mario Kart. As for me, sometimes choices, the element of possibility, is a bit overwhelming for me. Look at all these stats. I gotta figure out what everything does. I gotta use the Wikipedia to make my decisions. I have enough trouble figuring out what I want to do for the rest of my life. I don't want to play a game where I gotta do the same thing. It's dynamic and that's great, but it's not what personally pulls me to Elden Ring. That leads me to the player's perspective. Experiences are what a game designer creates, so understanding how an experience is perceived is really important because those experiences don't actually happen on the screen. They happen in the brain. Our brain is complex, and its complexity leads designers to make all kinds of decisions that don't seem apparent in the first prototypes of a game. I can't comment on how this game was tested and if it was always meant to be extra difficult, but at this point in time, many first-time players are coming in primed to believe that Elden Ring is hard, whether that's because of the media or the culture that surrounds the Souls games. Some players are blowing this game off as just a difficult challenge with nothing else going for it. Fans and haters alike have often wondered if Miyazaki, the main director, is some kind of sadist. But according to Miyazaki himself, he designs games thinking that he wants that stuff to be done to him as a player. He thinks as a player when designing games, so that's good. But the player is a masochist. Not all of us are masochists, so that can explain why you might not like this game. But not quite. Most games, to some degree, include a challenge or at least some level of problem solving. You might be looking at your game library and thinking, I like challenge, but I don't like Elden Ring. This could be for a variety of reasons depending on each player, but let's hone in on Richard Bartle's taxonomy of player types to figure out what's going on. Richard Bartle found these 4 types of players when he developed MMOs, but they are used for single-player games too. There are achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. These 4 player types occupy a sort of space that represents how each player finds pleasure within a game. Achievers want to achieve the goals of the game. Their primary pleasure is challenge. Achievers like to act on the world. Explorers want to get to know the breadth of the game. Their primary pleasure is discovery. Explorers like to interact with the world. Socializers are interested in relationships with other people. They primarily seek the pleasure of fellowship. Socializers like to interact with other players, basically. Lastly, there are killers who are interested in competing with and defeating others. Now, by the name you might think they just want to destroy people in team deathmatch or search and destroy. However, Bartle says killers want to impose themselves on others. This can mean that they like to help people as well. So that can include being part of a high rank within a fellowship or gift giving. So after learning about these player types, I decided to look at a super scientific sample size of 3 people and their interests in games. One of my friends, Bob, loves Dark Souls. He's played all the Souls games, including Sekiro and Bloodborne. Bob also loves Smash Bros, but here's where things start to make him look different from other people who play Smash. He enjoys playing against the computer. He has 1,000 hours on Smash, and most of that time is spent on single-player modes. I have another friend who has also played over 1,000 hours on Smash, but he plays almost exclusively online. His name is Mike, and he just cringes at the idea of playing Elden Ring. He's enjoyed Monster Hunter, and seems to enjoy challenge as long as there are people involved. Mike is also primed by the media and gameplay videos, so he's looking at Elden Ring with a bad perspective in the first place. Another friend, Jimmy, who kind of acts like a gamer jock, and he just lost to the Tree Sentinel 40 times and then quit. Jimmy loves to play MOBAs and Valorant and Overwatch. Oh, speaking of gamer jocks, Mike also loves to do the gamer jock squat when he's smashing too. I'm noticing some similarities between Jimmy and Mike. I do it too though, I'll admit it. But anyway, it's not the challenge that Jimmy and Mike dislike, it's that they don't get to be much of a jock in Elden Ring. As I mentioned earlier, players visit other players and destroy or help them, allowing the player to impose themselves on others. But that isn't the main focus of the game. I would say Elden Ring attracts the pure achievers and explorers more than socializers and killers. There is gameplay for socializers and killers to enjoy, but those parts aren't as thoroughly developed and integrated into Elden Ring as they are in competitive FPSs. There are plenty other elements of game design that we can look at to help explain why some folks just can't jive with Elden Ring. But since we are on the topic of challenge, let's look at the flow channel. You might have heard of the flow channel in regards to studying or productivity, but since games are fun problem solving, keeping the flow channel in mind is a valuable thing to do when designing a game. The psychological concept of flow was named and officially recognized by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He described it as being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away, time flies, every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one. Like playing jazz, your whole being is involved, and you're using your skills to the utmost. I felt this feeling the most when I used to draw a lot. Any activity that made me feel this sensation, I'd call cerebral. As a 12-year-old, playing Final Fantasy XII for the first time was cerebral. That's a different video. Sorry. In order to achieve and stay in flow, you must stay in the narrow margin of challenge that lies between boredom and frustration. Because if you don't, you're gonna want to do something else, like look at TikTok. This narrow margin is called the flow channel. So let's look at this flow channel graph to better understand it. A represents Jimmy, who just started up Elden Ring. He ends up in a chapel and begins to learn the basic controls such as jumping, rolling, and attacking. He learns basic movement by trial and error, and the social elements of the game too. Eventually, an enemy takes Jimmy down to the depths of a cave, and this gives Jimmy the clear goal of getting out of said cave. Within the cave, he gets to the tutorial area and learns about fall damage and the Sights of Grace game mechanic. Then the game introduces an enemy. It's an easy one, and the only challenge Jimmy faces is hitting an attack button at the right time. This isn't hard, but Jimmy might get a small kick out of it because, being a newbie, the level of difficulty is right for him, so he's likely to be in the state of flow. But if he gets good at defeating the same type of enemy, which he does, he'll get bored of the game quickly and enter into a state of boredom. Unsurprisingly, the game presents a more difficult enemy, a soldier with a shield. It doesn't take too long for Jimmy to figure out how to defeat him, and then he moves to learn about other combat mechanics. Finally, after all the basics are taught, the game offers an even stronger enemy. Jimmy loses once, no biggie. He was close to winning anyway. It wasn't enough to take him to the state of anxiety. He beats it the second try and moves on to something that does take him to the state of anxiety. He gets to the open world and meets the Tree Sentinel. Jimmy doesn't have to fight the Tree Sentinel. The game gives him another clear goal as well, which is to follow the light of grace. But he chooses to fight the Tree Sentinel. It's a really tough but completely optional enemy, and he loses 40 times and quits the game. He put himself into a state of anxiety, and being overwhelmed with his poor performance, he quit the game believing he could never finish Elden Ring. To be fair to Jimmy, Csikszentmihalyi says that the way back to flow requires that he increase his skills. Theoretically, he could also reduce the challenges he is facing, and thus return to the flow where he started. But in practice, it is difficult to ignore a challenge once one is aware that they exist. I mean, once I got to the Tree Sentinel, it took me about 10 tries to defeat it. My friend Bob took only around 5 tries, but that guy has played all the Souls games, so it doesn't count. However, Jimmy never really got to experience the deeper state of flow that Elden Ring offers right after the tutorial area. If he followed the lights, he would have found a salesman offering knowledge and gear that would have supported Jimmy's journey. The salesman gives additional goals for Jimmy to work towards in addition to the main goal of following the light of grace. If he explores more, he could find a dark cave with wolves in it, and it would most likely be too difficult for Jimmy to tackle without a light source, and that experience could attract him to working towards a secondary goal of buying more equipment. He needs more runes though, so he ventures towards the light of grace and finds a camp full of soldiers. Jimmy would get tested more appropriately here, as opposed to the Tree Sentinel. There are a greater number of enemies here, and one soldier a step above the rest, but Jimmy would probably see that it's doable unlike the cave without the light. So, at this point, Jimmy would most likely be in the state of flow. Even if he loses a couple times, he believes he can win. Also, this area includes loot and a map of the region that he's in, allowing him to explore even more, especially after he gets access to his spectral steed. He can then freely explore the depths of the world, find dungeons, tackle more increasingly difficult enemies which all aid him in developing his character stats and skills. Then, if he wants to, he can go back and fight that Tree Sentinel. If anything, that's why the Tree Sentinel is there, to remind you that you can always come back to a challenge. For me, it was the second main boss, Godric, which made me decide to explore and fight other monsters. Eventually, I found a really helpful summon that would distract Godric so that I could inflict real damage. The game never really put me into the state of boredom. You still have to be alert, even with the weaker enemies, and it definitely pushed me closer towards a state of anxiety, but the game gives options to overcome obstacles. Again, you can get summons or special items, or you can call a friend to help you out. So yeah, I think it's quite easy to get into the state of flow when the game almost naturally gives you secondary reasons to explore in addition to the main quest. You could argue that the Tree Sentinel's placement is like a double-edged sword, but really, 40 attempts just shows that Jimmy is a special kind of person. Either he didn't care for the world, or maybe there was something else. Maybe Jimmy and Mike just don't care to actually get good. Maybe the way they treated Elden Ring reflects their own individual walks in life. Maybe it's just a matter of nature versus nurture, and they have been giving in to their inferior, plebeian, pedestrian natures when they could just build themselves up to overcome the struggles and obstacles we face in life every day. Maybe Jimmy and Mike are just addicted to the instant gratification of the loot crates and gacha reward points that plague modern gaming. They can't get good because it doesn't feel pleasurable to get good anymore. Dopamine has become a popular subject over the past couple years, especially in the self-improvement space as well as addiction space. It's a neuromodulator, which when released, changes the probability that certain neural circuits will be active and that other neural circuits will be inactive. Those circuits are related to our levels of energy and mindset, like the mindset of getting good. Dopamine is not just responsible for pleasure, it's mainly responsible for motivation and drive. Andrew Huberman dispels the myth that we get dopamine by simply enacting in certain behaviors we find pleasurable. But the amount of dopamine is actually dependent on the last experience you had, meaning that if the last experience you had gave you a lot of dopamine, that level of dopamine will eventually drop to a point lower than your baseline level, and the next activity you do will give you less dopamine. So in this case, if you had done the second activity first, there's a high chance that you could have gotten more dopamine than trying it after the first large dopamine spike. That's a big deal because if all you do is get a bunch of headshots, then get a loot crate, or get some new characters that you didn't really earn from gameplay, that activity starts to get old because your baseline level of dopamine eventually starts to get lower, as well as how high your peaks are, making the experience less pleasurable overall. Then, if you try another game like Elden Ring, you don't even want to try. I mean, we really fell as a society when we started letting kids play mobile games. The first thing that happens with these mobile games is they give you a tutorial about how the reward system works and how to unlock characters, and then they give you a little boost first by giving you in-game currency for free. That in-game currency translates into dopamine. You spend it and you might unlock an S tier character and you feel all giddy inside, or you tell your friend about it, whatever. In Elden Ring, you're sent into a dungeon by the first enemy you see. Then you likely die, lose currency, but it's always there for you to try again and pick up. It's a totally different experience. One game gives you sunshine and rainbows, and Elden Ring gives you death, but a second chance. For someone whose baseline might be pretty low due to their experience with poisonous modern gaming, that's probably a big turnoff. If your level of dopamine influences your drive to win, then Jimmy and Mike better get their dopamine back to baseline by trying to fix their lifestyles and stop playing Genshin Impact. Only then will getting good be fun for them. They will have the drive to push on and try other things in order to win. Win at Elden Ring and win at life.